It's my great pleasure to introduce our first guest speaker, Mircea Geoania, who is a former NATO Deputy Secretary General, and actually until quite recently, because he was NATO's Deputy Secretary General from 2019 to 2024. So it was until September last year, so very timely. So during this time, he led innovation efforts, and in particular, he helped launch Diana, so I will probably hear from that, and please do not hesitate to raise questions you have on Diana, and also the NATO Innovation Fund. So our guest speaker is a prominent Romanian public figure. He's held top roles, including ambassador to the US, foreign minister, and president of the Senate, which is something we share because I'm the president of the Senate in Belgium, so it's a capacity we share. And then in 2006, he founded the Aspen Institute in Romania, of which he's very active also now. So, Mr. Geoania, it's a real pleasure to have you here, and I immediately give you the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Good to see you all. Thank you for coming on a Memorial Day weekend. As the chair mentioned, when I got this position in NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, my boss, asked me to be the champion of innovation. And I think this was one of the most rewarding jobs I had in my long career in international and domestic affairs. I don't need to tell this committee the transversal, transformative, and exceptionally consequential role of technology in modern life, in modern society, in economy, and of course in security. So when I speak about these subjects, I always try to put, because you know the NATO compass is there, I'm trying to put a sort of a visual symbol in front of you. If I'll be putting in the four corners of the compass economy, security, technology, and society in the four corners, what is happening today in the world is like a magnetic storm, and the pendulum that is trying to find a new balance between economy, security, technology, and society is swirling from one quadrant to the other, trying to find a new balance. And of course, geopolitics and politics, that's something that we know from history. Nothing new under the sun. Competition, great powers, middle powers, regional powers, small nations, big nations, that's the name of the game. Nothing new. Different actors, same story. The economy is also exceptionally transformed these days, of course, because of geoeconomics and geopolitics, and you see tariffs and you see lots of things, but in fact also technology is changing the economic model. And then coming to security and technology, I want really to say that if we are, as a free societies and democratic societies, to continue to be able to sustain our way of life, imperfect as it is, we have to continue to be in the forefront of innovation and technology as nations, and of course as organizations like NATO, European Union, and other like-minded organizations. So I heard the agenda for today. I think it's quite rich and dense, and it fits to I think to the priorities that we all have. But I would add a little bit of the transversal implication of AI on a number of additional adjacent technologies that AI will be and is, as we speak, spurring and making them exceptionally fast and potentially disruptive. And if we don't embrace them, including in national security and defense, then it's a matter of time between when the moment of our superiority will be left to others, and that's the beginning of the end. The moment you lose the edge on technology, on innovation, that's a matter of time and method when your superiority is eroded. And then, as Eric Schmidt, the founder of Google, told us in NATO when he was invited to address the North Atlantic Council, speaking of AI and superior intelligence, which is non-human, If we don't do it right now, tomorrow it could be too late. And the only thing we could do is to try to unplug this collective wisdom of AI. So I would also, before coming to Diana and the NATO Innovation Fund, what we can do and we should do in NATO as nations together, all our partners around the world. I would say that in the understanding of security and the interest for defense and national security all across NATO and across our partners around the world, I would say that the one we should look with more attention into is biotechnology and synthetic biology, which leads to human augmentation. Of course, you speak about unmanned, we speak about drones, under the sea, above the sea, we speak about space. But I would say that the other immensely transformative technology that AI is turbocharging is biotechnology, synthetic biology, and human augmentation. Which starts, human augmentation is the military term for basically trying to give our soldiers additional capacities through technology to be able to overcome their adversaries. Synthetic biology, which is a smaller segment of biotech, is again something that is changing, the human species. Very soon we'll have technologies that will be able to recuperate limbs of wounded soldiers, to regenerate amputated arms and pieces of the body. Speaking of the environment, that is such an important topic, synthetic biology will be leading to reducing CO2 emissions by animals and by agriculture up to 80%. This is a piece of disruptive technologies that I'm encouraging this committee, because you're the heart of this conversation in the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, in your national parliaments, and of course in the NATO ecosystem, to really look into biotech, synthetic biology, and human enhancement. And if there are any questions about this topic, I'm ready to dwell a little bit deeper into it. The other thing which is also immensely strategic, and where AI is also adding immense velocity to transformation and innovation, and I see mobilization of money and venture capital and interest from the private sector, and of course from governments, is on the other side of issues where we have, I would say, this is a public session, so I will say it a little bit more, not as dramatic as I use it in a closed session, semi-closed, semi-open, like societies today. The issue that I anticipate that with the help of AI, and also because of the geoeconomic and geopolitical immense advantage of China on rare earth and materials, which I'm afraid is a little bit late in the game for us to reverse the trend. We could eventually marginally reduce this immense advantage they have, and they build it in time with patience, with knowledge, and with very, very disciplined approach to these things. So what should be the answer from our side? Of course, try to have rare earth and deals on minerals and all these things that we are talking about and trying to do, which is normal. But I would say the new materials, inorganic materials, materials that do not exist in the Mendeleev table, is the new thing that is here, it's coming, and it's not just weak signals that our scientists are anticipating research and reading a paper in one newspaper, I don't know where, in Iceland, or in America, or in France, or in Japan, or Australia, or Armenia, or Albania, doesn't matter where. This is coming because this is both an effect of AI and the capacity to process so much data that you can really find new materials that are not in the Mendeleev table. This is a strategic imperative because we cannot be so dependent on rare earth and materials from others, but it's also a matter of science, technology, and innovation that is coming. And I also like to add, from biotech, synthetic, augmentation, new materials. And this is not only 3D printing and things that we know. These are organic things that we reorganize. Fine. But I would argue that new materials, inorganic new materials outside of this world that we know, this biological world that we know, and physical world and chemical world we know, is something that is coming, and I think will be producing, speaking of my pendulum, an immense transformation of industry, of supply chain, of the way in which we organize our world. Of course, the others like space, the others like, of course, AI and frontier AI and all these things, something that you do, and if there are questions, I would like to answer. Now, what can NATO do about this? And when Jens Stoltenberg asked me to be the champion of innovation, we had to struggle politically to convince allies, and you're the allies, and you're the partners of NATO, to give us a little bit of room of maneuver and innovating on innovation. And this was not easy, but in the end, I'm very thankful to all your nations because they gave us the green light, because without the consensus of the Council and of your nations is not moving. So we managed to create, how should I put it, to harness the ecosystem of talent and innovation all across NATO and across our partners. Because if we continue, I'm very, respectful of what's happening in Silicon Valley or in Boston or in France or in Germany or in the UK, but if you don't use every single ounce, small cubic millimeter of talent and imagination we have in all our nations, will not be able to outcompete the others. So my job, in fact, was, together with my colleagues and with your nations, to really find some new ways to harness the innovation ecosystem, the talent that we have all across our great alliance, and to be honest, today is not put to work. Why? Because the bigger players with more money and let's say, with, in a way, more gravitas are accumulating, and that's great, because you need champions. But I think that this is something that Diana is, I would say, is a precursor for something, I believe, through the help of your committee and the help of your colleagues in the organization, in NATO and in other places, will be able to move forward. What was the idea? Let's go to each NATO country, and I hope this will also happen with our partners, and see where they believe, and we believe in NATO, they have something which is really state-of-the-art. So we're speaking about I don't know, quantum, which is something that I didn't mention, but is also coming and is hugely transformative as well. We go to Denmark, and the Niels Bohr Institute is an obvious place. Normally, if you go to MIT, you go to Caltech, I don't know, you go to Imperial College, you go to La Polytechnique, I don't know where. But in fact, Diana is a collection of test centers and accelerators from all our nations. Italy is a champion in this. I think they have 7 or 8 or 9. US is giving to Diana something quite smart at MIT and something in Seattle. Romania is giving something on AI and aerospace or something. Not all of them equally potent, if you want, but all of them equally interesting. And I'm encouraging you, as national political leaders, to ask your own governments and ask NATO, what's the state of the selection and usefulness of your country's respective nations' contribution to Diana? Because this is not a fixed thing. They come and go, they qualify and disqualify, and there is a very, very solid assessment coming from NATO, from my former colleagues doing innovation, and saying, okay, you've done your job. This is a fantastic tool. Also from a different perspective, Diana is offered for free to startups from all our nations. You have a bright idea. You're from Albania. Super smart guys. Super smart guys, like everywhere across this alliance of ours. But between you have an idea in Tirana and you really go and put it on the market, God bless your soul if you're successful and have enough money and perseverance to cross the desert between an idea and some form of validation of the idea, at least the proof of concept. Diana is offering this free of charge to companies, young companies, startup companies for dual-use technologies and related, to really test their ideas in Diana and really make sure that we help the innovation ecosystem across our alliance to become a little bit more vibrant, more mature, and also keep the innovators with the money in their pockets and not sell equity too soon, because this is also an issue that is affecting this. So I'm saying that Diana is a very interesting experiment. We have a headquarters in London, at the Imperial College. It's a UK-Estonia joint venture, but this is offered to all the nations. So I'm encouraging you, this committee, because that's your turf, Mr. Chairman, to really look into this and embrace this. It's really smart. And I think it's just the beginning of something that will have even more of this all across the alliance. And I hope with our partners, trusted partners, because this is something that I think we should also look into. Now, it comes the money part. This is the innovation part and the startup part and testing your technology part, which is great. And that's why we went, how do we finance this kind of smart startups? And it was a huge struggle to convince allies to allow us to have the first of its kind multinational sovereign venture capital fund, which is a contradiction in terms, apparently. Venture capital is venture capital. They go, they take the risk, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But our nations in NATO agreed to put some money together, and we have a NATO Innovation Fund, which is registered in Luxembourg for obvious reasons, operates from the Netherlands. I've seen our Dutch friends there, also for obvious reasons, but they're already dispersing money. It's a totally independent from NATO. We recruited originally professionals from venture capital. Nothing to do with us. We don't tell them anything. It's on purpose. We created a firewall between the political side of the alliance and the business side on this one. And this is the NATO Innovation Fund, which is the first iteration. Some nations are not yet there. US is I hope that in the second fund and the third fund, they operate like a normal fund. They raise money, they disperse money. The advantage of the NATO Innovation Fund that is less impatient than regular venture capital. So I'm more patient with this kind of money because this money is done not to have return on investment, it's to have return on talent. So it operates like venture capital, but its impact is like more patient venture capital, which serves the purpose of this thing. So I'm encouraging you and the nations that are not yet in the NATO Innovation Fund, or I think my colleagues in NATO are working on the second iteration of the fund, so this fund is winding up, and there will be a new one. I also hear, and I'm very encouraged that an older idea that we had in NATO, it didn't fly, it was too ambitious to have a NATO bank, is now coming into an idea to have a multilateral bank that will be financing on top of what national governments do and Ministry of Defense do, to have some form of additional resources. And this Defense Innovation Security and Resilience Bank, I think it's called, is a project that I fully support. And there was a conversation at the EU-UK summit, I think last Monday, about the idea to do something in Europe and offer to all the allies for being able to have even additional resources where the public money and the speed of that is not doing well enough. So in a nutshell, this is, I think, I'm here preaching to the choir. Your reports are great. We always read them and read them in NATO. That's very valuable. I also congratulate not only the leadership, but also the rapporteurs. I know how much work it is behind. I was member of my country's NATO PA delegation when I was not in kindergarten, but a little bit. I was in high school. And I know how important your work is. So I responded with great pleasure to the invitation of you, Mr. Chair, and of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly to be with you this morning. So any questions, I'm here to answer.
Thank you very much. And indeed, we already have two people wanting to ask questions. Please do not hesitate to raise your hand so that we can identify whoever wants to ask a question. But if you allow me, I'd like to ask a first one, and then I'll go to the others. So the last point you mentioned is of importance to us in particular, right? So it's how would you describe, since you've been in contact with the AP, NATO PA, and and you said that you read the reports, right? But how widespread are these reports that we prepare with so much care? And we'll have 3 more of these today. So how much are they read, and how much do they influence NATO? And do you see a way by which we could amplify the impact of the work that is being done at NATO PA?
That's a very valid question. I cannot say for the whole organization, but at least when it came to us, the leadership and the specialized colleagues in the divisions in NATO that are dealing with innovation, we read everything you do. And the influence, of course, the influence. I cannot say that they influence dramatically or not, but as we get the political sense from you where nations stand, and this is something that helps us in dealing with governments, because we deal with governments, not with parliaments, to try to find a segue towards moving forward. Some of the ideas we even embrace. The ideas on resilience, the ideas on cyber, ideas on space. Sometimes we even build upon that and use it in our political argumentation to allies. If your members of your national parliaments recommend that, it's also useful. To be honest, it's also used for us pragmatically to do some heavy lifting when heavy lifting politically is needed, and it takes a little bit of thing. We can do better. I would recommend, why not, that's a suggestion of mine, we have a sort of innovation advisory board of NATO, so we have, I think, 10 or 11. They change every 2 years, I think, and we ask nations to give us their top experts on topics like the ones I've mentioned that are of interest to us. One suggestion I would have is to eventually, of course, invite my colleague or my former colleagues dealing with this, but also to look into the innovation board that we have, and I was chairing this, and eventually try to invite not only the NATO advisory board on innovation, but also try to have some key allies that have similar bodies advising them from the outside, advising national governments. And not only the Pentagon, and not only the CIA, or specialized agencies, but people coming from research, from academia, from business. And I think this will be a very interesting way for you to get at the same time, like the organization proper, the same input that we are taking. And I think if we have the same input, each does his or her job. You do your job because your specific job in NATO, they do their job, is their job. But I recommend some form of periodical, even online, if it's difficult to invite people to Dayton or to Montreal. And I would suggest, because if we have terms of reference that are closer, then I think the way in which we process the outcomes and the policies and the recommendations we make or decisions we take will be so I suggest a sort of a practical way. Another organization that I recommend you invite, and I think you do invite, is the Chief Scientist and the Science and Technology Organization in NATO. If you really want to hear from people that are anticipating technologies to come that are still not yet here, some of them here, I would, and Dr. Brian Wells, he's the Chief Scientist of NATO. That's another person, and his team. They're formidable. And they have in their ecosystem thousands and thousands of your countrymen and countrywomen dealing with innovation in your countries. They are part of the Science and Technology Organization. There are thousands of the best researchers we have in our nations working with NATO through that channel. So this will be the 2 segues I will recommend to the committee.
Thank you very much. And we'll take these suggestions for future meetings. I think we have a first question from Canada, from Sherry Galland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So once we have a company that with an innovation and it goes through Diana and it crosses the valley of death and they make their prototypes, they still need the certification to deal with, to sell to other countries. And from our standpoint, Canadian innovation, it is very difficult to overcome the EU obstacle. They require destructive testing, which is in the tens of thousands of dollars for the small prototypes. So my question is whether or not NATO, through Diana, and in cooperation with the EU and other European countries, have a way to fast track or perhaps even exempt the certification process if we're in a really hot war and innovation is happening really quickly?
Thank you for the question. It's a very valid one. I didn't mention in my intervention the essential issue of intellectual property. And this is something that we have to look into very, very carefully. It's really a matter of the heart of the matter. So you need talent, innovation, money, venture capital, valley of death, but you also need to make sure that the intellectual ownership of these things are done properly. The beautiful thing about NATO is that we do not do the work with every kind of technology. And the EU, because there is a sort of a handicap that the European Union and us in Europe have acquired when it comes to the US and others, there is a sort of a tendency to use regulation or over-regulation, and this is something it's above my pay grade. But on dual-use technologies, if an innovation from a startup, Canadian or Albanian, goes through the NATO Innovation, the Diana and Innovation Fund, all of a sudden they got the seal of approval of NATO, and including of our Supreme Allied Command Transformation in Norfolk, Virginia, they're doing innovation for us. So all of a sudden that company not only has tested its idea, the prototype, and intellectual property, and getting a little bit of seed money for them to continue, but they get the seal of approval of NATO that dual-use technology, not every technology, dual-use technology is interesting from a NATO perspective. They can go everywhere and raise money, including in the EU. What we've done with the EU, because EU is an essential partner for us, for NATO, irrespective how you look at this thing, we need each other. And that's why we managed, and this is good for you to know and talk to your startup community back in your home countries. We have a memorandum of understanding signed between the NATO Innovation Fund and European Investment Bank, EIF, the European Investment Fund. And together, one startup, including from Canada, non-EU countries, they can qualify for joint funding from the NIF, NATO Innovation Fund, and EIF on a specific project. This is beautiful. So you can also go, they can also finance not only startups in terms of tech or dual-use tech, but also they can finance new venture capital funds in your countries. They can be the anchor of a new dual-use venture capital fund in smaller places that are not usual suspects, where there is more irrigation with venture capital and this kind of thing. So I think for dual-use technologies, if you go through the NATO channel, I think it's much easier also on the EU side, because the same nations are also part of this. And I think if we look to our newest allies, and so proud to have Finland and Sweden with us in this great alliance of ours, there's also a fantastic proof how quickly they managed to adjust their defense and tech sectors to use the NATO issue. So standards, procedures, and the blessing of our military innovation leaders is gold for a private, for a startup. Because you have the seal approval of NATO, this is useful, this is something I could use. And then the sky is the limit. And you also keep your money in your pocket. And you have, my ambition, my post-job ambition is to see the first unicorns coming of Diana and the NIF. And I think this one day that moment will come.
Okay, very nice, thank you. We have a next question, and please raise your hand if you want to have additional questions, right? So, but we have from the UK, Stuart Anderson, who has a question. I leave you the floor.
Thank you, Chair. That was a fascinating speech, and there's many questions I could unpick, but I've got two that come to the forefront. Myself and Lord Beamish, on behalf of the UK Defence Select Committee in 2022, went to Australia, not only looking at AUKUS, but the critical minerals, rare earth metals. They were really waking up to the fact that we were so far behind China. They were moving forward at a rapid pace. who else or which other countries are making a step in this? And as you say, we are quite a way behind on that at the moment, and we might never get to the place we need to, but we do need to move forward. And the second one, I probably declare a personal interest. You mentioned about synthetic biology and regrowing of limbs. As someone who's had a part of his foot amputated through a gunshot wound, will I be buying any shoes soon? And what sort of time frame are we looking at this? Thank you.
Thank you so much. As you know, NATO has I think 30 plus partners around the world. Of course, with various degrees of intensity of our partnership. So from Colombia all the way to the Middle East. I'm still sorry that we are not able to go in sub-Saharan Africa to start answering to your first question. And Ghana was quite close, and then we didn't manage to move forward. And of course, we have countries in Europe and the Caucasus, and also what we call the Asia-Pacific, Indo-Pacific, 4 partners: Australia, Japan, South Korea, and New Zealand. And I have to say that with the what we call the Indo-Pacific 4, that they come to each of our summits since, I think, 3 summits back. And we'll see if they come to The Hague now. There'll be a shorter summit. We developed a level of intimacy with these 4 Asia-Pacific partners and others, but with these 4, because you mentioned Australia, which is quite unique. And we have a sort of a framework cooperation with them that covers roughly around cyber and technology, and also a sort of an indirect way to talk about supply chain and dependencies. So what I can say that I only hope that this partnership will deepen. We lost some precious decades when it comes to our arch competition with China on creating, global value chains and integrating this. But I think if we get a conversation which is honest and mutually beneficial to many of the countries in the world, I think we could at least diminish, but not reverse probably totally, the advance that China has on these things. Australia is not only about AUKUS. Australia has, with India, a major player, which is not a partner of NATO for reasons that can be understood. They developed mill-to-mill relationships. So the Indo-Pacific partners are not only working with NATO and with Europe, but they're also working with some of the partners that us Europeans, and even the US, has some difficulties in reaching out because they have credibility for reasons which are of regional. As many of the NATO countries, I mentioned Sweden and Finland, many others, Nordic countries, they have a fantastic reputation in Africa. Fantastic reputation. They've been there for decades, helping, putting money, not asking nothing for nothing in return. I mean, nothing obvious at least. And I think we should do a much better job in engaging with other partners, because now the balance of the world and the new world order will depend not only on the big players, America and China and their allies and whatever, or Russia, whoever, or even India, will depend on the middle powers and many of the smaller nations that will be creating in this pendulum, swirling a new reality. The U.S. has a number of what they call non-NATO allies. They have also treaty allies, speaking of Australia, Japan, and Korea. So I think our nations, some of the key players in NATO at least, they have special relationship with other countries. And I think we should put this thing in a sort of not to put them in one basket. It's impossible politically and practically in terms of foreign policy, but at least to establish the strategic directions of what we want to achieve. And at that moment, I think we could have some form of answer. Speaking of the timetable for this, like with nuclear fusion, like with synthetic biology, I think in the distance of probably up to from 7 to 8 to 9 to a decade, I think we'll be seeing these things functionable and And that's why I mentioned the very positive impact of this, but also the very complex way in which they will impact everything else. So it's moving very fast. I cannot say when, but I'm seeing advancements in research and applied research, not only scientific research, that it's mind-boggling. So I hope you're young, so you can. Okay, thank you.
Well, I was young too, and when I was studying engineering, I remember that the prospect of fusion was 10 or 20 years from and then it seems to be a receding horizon, right? It moves as, but maybe not for organic biology.
I used to be an energy engineer in my first incarnation, so this is also coming. I don't know when, but this is coming also relatively fast, and the horizon is getting closer.
Okay, very good. Since we were talking about the soon coming NATO in The Hague, we'll give the word to our colleagues from the Netherlands with Bart Kroon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Vincent. Thank you. And also, thank you, Mr. Genoa, for opening our senses again on what our future technology will bring and the potential that can have for our adversaries, but also for the alliance. Now, being more of a business leader than a politician, I recognize the need for ecosystems and access to finance to jumpstart technology. And when it comes to the subject of the Innovation Bank that you mentioned, elaborating a bit more, what target investors groups would you expect to fund such an innovation investment bank? And what governance would be required on such a bank to ensure that both the NATO and the investors' objectives can be met?
I would encourage, if you have not done it yet, to have a look of a UK Treasury non-paper on the gaps on innovation and financing of innovation, defense and security. And that document was I think at the basis of a UK-EU conversation on May 19th at Lancaster House in London, which, by the way, I think that's my personal, I'm a private citizen now, I think it was a very promising start. And I'm not getting into British politics about post-Brexit things, but I believe UK and the EU, I think that's a very important thing. So if you look to the gaps, because you don't need an institution just for the sake of having a new institution. That's bureaucracy, and I'm against it totally. But there is a difficulty now to finance some segments of the ecosystem of defense and national security. And I give you insurance, reinsurance of exports. If we produce more in Europe, and of course across the alliance, this is not only for the purpose of our own militaries, it's also for exports. We need to make money out of this. It's our taxpayers' money. It's your taxpayers' money. So this is something that has to have return on investment in creating jobs, in having intellectual property and smart ideas and unicorns and small business. But this is something that I believe there is not a clear insurance, reinsurance is one thing. There are also deals that procurement is becoming much quicker now. And Ukraine has taught us that the velocity of innovation, procurement, and this is something that I think our MODs, our Ministry of Defense, and our treasuries are learning this thing. So you'll need some quicker way for a commercial bank or an investment fund, a private equity or a venture capital. And by the way, there is a subspecies of venture capital that are already specialized for defense and security. They're a little bit more patient. There's a great one in Toronto, to our colleague from Canada asking the question. So I think a multilateral bank, how should I put it, or sort of a EBRD for defense and innovation. This is something I believe would make sense, and there are many gaps in financing. We also do something which is quite good with this one. We also, I think, break the still existing barriers from the financial sector, pension funds, even commercial banks, and even private equity to invest in defense and national security. It was like a sort of a le roi maudit it was very difficult to convince financial sector to invest in defense. It was something bad. It was reputationally bad. And to all due respect, I think that security is the foundation of our economy and democracy and liberty. Not investing in defense is like, you know, giving up on your very existence as nations and as free nations around the world. So I think there is room for that. I'm encouraged by the conversation. There are also, I also talked to CEOs of large banks about this on totally, you know, pro bono way. And there will be, I think, a need for something like this. We'll see if the devil is in details and negotiations when you start having governments and treasuries, because this will be a discussion among treasuries in the Netherlands and other places. Not this will be, you put some money into this, so you need to make sure that governance is done properly. This will not be MOD driven. This will be Ministry of Finance driven.
Yeah, but then if we have the bean counters making decisions on defense spending, then there's not going to be a lot of spending.
Yes, but defense spending through national procurement and national financing has a limitation in terms of the huge needs to finance this ecosystem of startups and dual-use technology and advanced technology. And I think an additional instrument to basically address the gaps and also broaden the spectrum of financial resources mobilized is something that makes sense to me.
Thank you. We slowly come to a conclusion of this session, but we still have 2 requests of questions. So I suggest you ask both questions very, very quickly, and then we have a quick answer, and then we have a break, right? So that we keep to the schedule. So if I could give the word d'abord à notre ami France.
First to our French colleagues.
This is for France, but I'm not sure they're going to express their question.
Sophie, un test.
Yes, just checking. So from France, Mr. Folio, and then also our colleagues from the European Parliament, Waterbeek. But if you could both ask a very quick question, and then we come to the answer and we conclude the session.
Oui, merci, yes. Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Secretary General. 2 reflections, 2 thoughts compared to what you just told us. First of all, when it comes to the in-depth project for investment purposes to support these innovation elements, how can we get out of the contradictory framework that might exist compared to the fact that the countries of the alliance, we are all gathered by the defense of a number of values, and on the economy level for defense, there are opposition trends between the U.S. and other allies, and amongst other allies where they are nationalistic champions with everything that implies. How can we have a good articulation in this field? And second point, and one of the speakers mentioned the question of some resources and rare earth. And the difficulty in some European countries and alliance countries is the difficulty to make socially acceptable to the population the opening of mines to exploit these resources. So we are in a contradictory framework with some social or societal expectations, with environmental extremist trends manipulated by the far left, which block any perspective, any option in this area, and the need for the countries of the alliance to secure autonomous resources in this sector.
We come to Waterbeek from the European Parliament.
Yes, very short. I think that the idea of a NATO bank is very interesting, also raising the private capital. But my question is, how do you see the link with initiatives taken on the European level? I mean, there is the idea of strengthening the European Investment Bank for defense matters. There is the idea of the European defense bonds. There is the idea of strengthening the capital market union in a view of investing in defense, among other things. So how do you see this kind of initiatives together with initiatives taken at the NATO level?
Merci pour les questions.
Thank you for your questions.
Is in our societies to start, reopening mining and things like this. That's a real obstacle to many of us. I do believe that if we'll be able to use more innovation and technology to more environmentally friendly technologies, which is now more possible than before, we could reluctantly overcome some of these difficulties. Some of the countries in NATO, like Canada and others, do have immense reserves. Other partners that we don't have yet an intimate relationship do have that. So I think if we do something, very advanced at home, and also more respectful and more mutually beneficial for other partners, I think we could be in the position to. Australia was another case that was mentioned by our British friends just a minute ago. The first question was on sur la mobilisation des.
The mobilization of what? Economic compatibility between a NATO objective for emergence of breaking technologies and the fact that countries are competing with each other.
There is, of course, waiting for the big political decisions on tariffs, on access to EU markets by American big tech and other things that are politically complex. But as we speak, with the perspective of having probably hundreds of billions of additional euros or dollars into defense, there is a beginning of what I would call a sort of a European, transatlantic and global industrial ecosystem in the making as we speak. You'll never be able to stop a government to support its national champions. It's impossible. Because that's a matter of sovereignty and a matter of national economic interest. But as we speak, there are European companies talking to Japanese and British companies on the 6th generation fighter jet. There are lots of combinations between, and this is important for this committee too. We see defense companies, the big boys, big traditional boys in defense, European and American and others, moving towards technology. And you see technology moving towards defense. So as we speak, there is a combination, a myriad of partnerships between that French company with that American company, between that Italian company and that British and that Japanese company. As we speak, there are, how should I put it, industrial tech defense consortia that are project-driven. Of course, difficult to manage. Who's the driver? Is an American company's subsidiary in Europe considered as a EU company or not? Don't know. Could be, could not be. That's a matter of negotiation in the end. So what I'm saying that we have to wait for the geo-economic and the political discussion to find a balance. But as we speak, our industries, big and small, are moving towards more international cooperation. And I anticipate that after the Hague summit, and I want to thank our Dutch friends for giving us Mark Rutte and also to hosting the summit, I think we'll have more clarity from the US how much and in which conditions they will continue to invest in European security and how much us Europeans and Canadians will be in the situation to make a new equilibrium. So I think business is looking for solutions, market-driven solutions, and most of these solutions cannot be done at the national level alone. Not even the big, super big champions of traditional defense can produce things only by themselves. They need partners. They need the industrial consortia as we speak. When I mentioned this instrument of additional financing, I'm totally incorporating the great decision that the EU has taken and President von der Leyen announcing the 800 billion euros. But also, if you look to the instruments used there, you have 1.5% additional budget deficit for defense. You have, of course, issuing some debt, some mutualizing a little bit of debt so you can really get some loans. And then you have the EIB, as you mentioned, playing a bigger role. And I hope that EIB, like other banks, will overcome faster some of the reservations they had, including in their charter, to find innovation. So they move to dual use and they move to others. Even with that kind of money, this will not be enough to cover all the gaps that only the private sector and a sense of driven investment could lead. So when I mentioned the idea to have a sort of a defense, innovation and security and resilience bank, because the definition of security is so broad today, is not only procurement for the Ministry of Defense. I need supply chain. I want to make sure that I have, if God forbid something bad happens, I need continuity of government, that my pipelines, that my undersea infrastructure is protected. That's a lot of money that needs to be done from a lens of security. And I think that there is room for an additional instrument to mobilize private capital on top of what our governments and our institutions are doing. And I applaud what the EU is doing. I think it's a wake-up call to all of us. I really think it's a great decision to be followed.
Thank you very much. I think this was a great introduction for this session.